Mrs. Lynn lived on the edge of a small, quiet town, where the roads were dusty in summer and muddy in the rain. Her small house, made of faded wood and patched tin, stood alone at the end of a narrow lane. She had lived there for many years, ever since her husband had passed away. Her children, grown and scattered in distant cities, visited only once or twice a year. Most days, the house felt too big and too empty, and the silence could press down on her like a heavy blanket. Each morning, Mrs. Lynn would wake before the sun. She would sweep the dirt floor of her home, tidy the few belongings she had, and then step outside to her small garden. She had planted vegetables and herbs in neat rows, working tirelessly in the soil, coaxing life from it. Tomatoes, green beans, and a small patch of lettuce thrived under her careful hands. Despite her efforts, the garden could only provide so much. The small earnings from selling vegetables at the local market barely paid for the essentials: rice, a few eggs, some oil. Meat and fruit were considered luxuries she could rarely afford. As winter approached, the nights grew cold, and Mrs. Lynn could feel the loneliness settle around her like the frost on the ground. The town prepared for the Christmas season. Lights twinkled in shop windows, families hung wreaths on doors, and the smell of baked bread and roasted meat floated through the air. But Mrs. Lynn's house remained quiet. The only decoration she had was a single lantern she hung near the door. A tiny flicker of light in the darkness. She often sat by the window in the evening, gazing at the town. She watched children running with laughter, friends and neighbors exchanging gifts, and families gathering around tables piled with food. A pang of sadness struck her each time. She remembered her husband, who used to bring her flowers in winter, and the simple Christmas dinners they had shared. She thought of her children, their smiles, and how life had moved them far away. Her heart ached with longing, yet she kept her thoughts to herself. No one came to visit her now, and she had long since stopped expecting anyone to notice her. Despite the quiet and the lack of company, Mrs. Lynn maintained her routines. She woke early, tended to her garden, cooked simple meals, and cleaned her home. She spoke little to others, not out of pride but because she had grown used to solitude. She found small joys in everyday tasks. When the sun hit her lettuce leaves just right, or when a neighbor nodded kindly in passing, she felt a small spark of warmth. Yet, as Christmas approached, even these small joys seemed dimmed by the knowledge that she would have nothing for Christmas dinner. There would be no roast, no sweet treats, no shared laughter. Just rice, a few vegetables, and silence. On one particularly cold evening, Mrs. Lynn sat at her small wooden table, staring at the empty bowl in front of her. She had saved a handful of vegetables from the garden, but they would barely make a meal. She took out a small notebook where she kept memories of her family, sketches of her garden, and lists of things she wanted to do but never could. Her eyes lingered on a photo of her husband, smiling warmly in the sunlight. She whispered a quiet greeting to him, imagining he was there with her, and for a moment, the loneliness felt slightly less sharp. The townspeople were kind, but their kindness rarely extended beyond polite nods or passing greetings. Life was busy for everyone, and she understood that. She did not resent them. Still, there were moments when the silence of her home was almost unbearable. Sometimes, she would sit by the window with her lantern, letting the soft glow illuminate the corners of her home. It was a simple comfort. But in those moments, she felt less invisible. Mrs. Lynn's garden had always been more than just a source of food. It was a sanctuary. She could kneel in the soil, planting seeds, pulling weeds, and watering her crops. And for a few hours, she could forget her loneliness. The physical work tired her body, but it refreshed her mind. She imagined each plant growing tall and strong, each one a small victory against the emptiness she often felt. Yet, even her beloved garden could not replace the warmth of human connection. In the evenings, she would light her lantern and sit quietly, sometimes humming an old song her husband used to love. The melody was soft and fragile, but it brought memories of family gatherings, laughter, and love. On some nights, she would close her eyes and imagine her children around a table, sharing a meal and telling stories. She could almost hear their laughter, and for a fleeting moment, the cold and darkness did not seem so heavy. One particularly frosty evening, just a few nights before Christmas, Mrs. Lynn prepared her modest dinner. She boiled a small pot of rice and mixed in the vegetables she had carefully saved. It was a simple meal, but she ate it slowly, savoring each bite, as if trying to draw comfort from the act itself. After dinner, she sat by the window with her lantern, gazing at the stars. She wondered if anyone in the town would remember her, if anyone would knock on her door, or if she would spend Christmas entirely alone. The thought made her heart tighten, but she refused to give in to despair. She had endured hardships before, and she would endure this as well. That night, Mrs. Lynn went to bed early. She pulled her thin blanket tightly around her and closed her eyes, imagining her husband beside her. She dreamt of small joys, children playing in the garden, the smell of fresh bread, and the warmth of a shared meal. When she awoke the next morning, the frost had turned to soft sunlight, and the world seemed slightly less harsh. She rose, tended to her garden, and carried on with her routine, as she had done for years. Though she faced the prospect of another Christmas with nothing more than a simple meal, Mrs. Lynn did not lose hope entirely. Deep down, a small spark of anticipation remained, a quiet hope that something might change, even if she could not imagine how. She continued her chores, tending her garden and her home, always looking for small signs of life and beauty in the world around her. Even in the cold and quiet, Mrs. Lynn's heart remained open. She believed in kindness, in the goodness of people, and in the possibility that one day, someone might step into her life and bring warmth to her lonely home. She did not know when or how it would happen, but she held on to that hope like a precious seed, nurturing it carefully, just as she nurtured her garden. As Christmas Eve approached, the town buzzed with preparation and excitement. Lights were hung, cookies baked, and families gathered to share meals. Mrs. Lynn watched from her window, her lantern casting a soft glow across the room. She could see the joy of others, and though it reminded her of what she lacked, it also reminded her of what life could still offer. She longed for connection, for friendship, and for someone who might care enough to step into her quiet world. And so, she waited. Not passively, but with quiet resilience. She prepared for the day as best she could, tending her garden, cleaning her home, and keeping her little lantern burning. For Mrs. Lynn, hope was not loud or demanding. It was a quiet companion, flickering steadily in the darkness, reminding her that even in the loneliest moments, life could still surprise her. The morning of Christmas Eve arrived with a crisp chill in the air. Mrs. Lynn woke early, as she always did, and stepped outside to tend her garden. Frost sparkled on the leaves, and the sunlight made the tiny icicles on the fence shimmer like little crystals. She carefully checked her vegetables, watering them gently and picking what was ready for her small meal that evening. As she worked, she felt the familiar ache of loneliness in her chest. She missed laughter, missed conversation, missed someone noticing her small victories in life. As she bent over a patch of lettuce, she heard the distant sound of hooves clattering on the hard-packed dirt road near her house. Startled, she straightened and looked up. A man was riding toward her on a horse, dressed in a heavy coat and worn boots. His wide-brimmed hat shaded his face, but there was something gentle in his movement. He guided his horse carefully along the edge of the lane, and as he neared, Mrs. Lynn could see his eyes were kind and observant. The man slowed as he reached the gate of her yard and called out politely, "Good morning, ma'am. I hope I'm not intruding." Mrs. Lynn felt a small flutter of surprise. She rarely had visitors, and strangers were uncommon in her quiet part of town. She hesitated, unsure whether to respond. The man smiled warmly, sensing her caution. "My name is Tom," he said. "I live on a ranch a few miles from here. I was passing by and noticed your lantern shining last night. I thought I'd stop and say hello." Mrs. Lynn's lips parted in a small, polite smile. Thank you. I am Lynn," she replied softly. Her voice carried a mixture of curiosity and caution. She had learned over the years that not everyone who approached her had good intentions. She had to protect herself, even if it meant keeping her distance from kindness. Tom nodded respectfully. "It's a cold morning," he said, looking around at the frost. "I can see you have a garden here. You work hard." His voice was calm and genuine, without judgment or pity. Mrs. Lynn glanced at her vegetables. She had never thought of her efforts as anything worth noticing. But the simple recognition brought a warmth to her heart she had not felt in months. "Thank you," she said quietly. "It is enough to eat. But not much more." Tom's eyes softened. He dismounted from his horse and stepped closer, careful not to startle her. "I can see that. If you would allow me, I could bring a few things that might help with your meal tonight." Mrs. Lynn blinked. She had almost stopped hoping that anyone would notice her struggles. She looked at him for a long moment, uncertain whether to accept. Her pride and habit of solitude made her want to refuse, but something in Tom's calm and gentle demeanor made it difficult to say no. "Perhaps you may come in," she said at last, stepping aside. Her house was small, and she kept it tidy, but the emptiness was almost tangible. She moved slowly, careful not to show too much vulnerability. Tom followed politely, taking off his coat and hat, placing them neatly on a chair by the door. As he looked around, he noted the simplicity of her home. A small wooden table sat in the center, a few chairs arranged neatly, and shelves lined with jars of preserved vegetables and herbs. There were photographs of her family on the walls, carefully framed, showing children laughing, a husband smiling, and a younger Mrs. Lynn in her early years. The home had a quiet beauty, a reflection of her careful and modest life. Tom placed a small bag of supplies on the table. "I brought some rice, a few vegetables from my ranch, and some spices. Perhaps they could make tonight's dinner a bit more special." Mrs. Lynn felt a lump in her throat. She had not expected this. Tears threatened to spill, but she held them back. "Thank you," she whispered. "It is very kind of you." Tom smiled gently. "It's no trouble. I enjoy helping when I can. And besides, Christmas is tomorrow. No one should be alone and hungry on Christmas." There was a pause as they both considered the quiet of the room. Mrs. Lynn felt a flicker of something she had not felt in a long time: hope. Perhaps the world was not entirely cold and indifferent. Perhaps there were people who cared enough to step into someone else's life, even if only for a short while. Over the next hour, Tom helped her sort the vegetables, wash the rice, and plan a small meal. He did not rush or give orders. He moved quietly and respectfully, allowing Mrs. Lynn to retain control over her home and her routines. They worked together in a simple rhythm. Chopping, washing, stirring, and the act of preparing the meal together created an unspoken bond. During this time, Mrs. Lynn began to share small stories about her life. She spoke of her husband, who had been kind and patient, and the children she loved dearly. She spoke of the garden, which had been her constant companion for many years. Tom listened quietly, asking gentle questions, never interrupting or judging. Tom also shared stories of his own life. He spoke of the ranch, the cattle he cared for, and the solitude he experienced despite the wide-open spaces around him. He had lost his wife several years ago and had no children. The ranch work kept him busy, but he often felt the same loneliness that Mrs. Lynn carried with her. Their shared understanding of isolation created a bridge between them, a quiet connection born from similar experiences. As the afternoon sun dipped lower in the sky, the room began to glow with the soft light of the lantern and the warmth of the small stove. Mrs. Lynn realized that she was smiling, genuinely and without effort, for the first time in many months. She felt a lightness in her chest, a feeling of being seen and understood. Tom noticed the change in her demeanor. "You have a beautiful home," he said softly. "It may be small, but it is filled with care and attention. That matters more than anything else." Mrs. Lynn nodded, feeling the truth of his words. She had always taken pride in her home, even if it was modest. Now, for the first time, she realized that someone else noticed it too. As evening approached, they sat down at the table to eat the simple meal they had prepared together. The rice and vegetables were humble, but with the additions Tom had brought, They had been transformed into something special. They ate slowly, savoring the flavors, and for a brief time, the world outside ceased to exist. There was no cold, no emptiness, no silence, only the warmth of shared presence and the comfort of companionship. After the meal, Tom helped Mrs. Lynn clear the dishes and wash them. She watched him work with quiet gratitude. She did not have to say much. The simple act of being there, helping, and caring, was more meaningful than words could express. Before leaving, Tom smiled at her. "I will come by again tomorrow," he said. "And if you would like, we can prepare a proper Christmas dinner together." Mrs. Lynn felt her heart swell. She had not expected this kindness, this generosity, this presence. I would like that very much," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly. She realized that for the first time in many years, she was not entirely alone. As Tom rode away on his horse, Mrs. Lynn stood at the doorway, watching the fading light catch his figure. She felt a strange mixture of disbelief and hope. Perhaps life could still surprise her. Perhaps the loneliness she had carried for so long could be softened, if only a little, by the presence of another human being. That night, she lit her lantern and placed it in the window. A small signal to the world that she was still here, still waiting, and now, still hoping. She went to bed with a sense of anticipation she had not felt in years, imagining what the next day might bring. Mrs. Lynn's heart was still tender, still cautious, but it had opened a small crack for hope, and that hope was the beginning of a change that neither she nor Tom could have predicted. Through the simple acts of noticing, sharing, and helping, a bond was forming, a bond that would grow stronger, bringing warmth to a lonely house and companionship to hearts that had long been aching for connection. Christmas Eve had begun quietly, as it always did, but for Mrs. Lynn, the day ended with a promise. The promise that even in the loneliest moments, kindness could arrive in the most unexpected form, and sometimes it came riding on the back of a lone rancher. The morning after Christmas Eve arrived calm and bright. The sunlight reflected off the frost on the ground, painting the world in shades of gold and silver. Mrs. Lynn woke earlier than usual, filled with a quiet excitement. She had prepared her small garden, swept her home, and washed her simple dishes the night before. But now, she felt a different energy. Today, Tom, the kind rancher who had appeared the day before, would return, and for the first time in years, she felt that she would not be alone. When she stepped outside, the crisp air made her cheeks pink. She could see tracks in the frost, the marks of his horse from yesterday, and it reminded her that someone cared enough to step into her life. She could not help smiling softly. The garden seemed more alive today, the sunlight brighter, and even the cold seemed less biting. She busied herself, picking fresh vegetables, washing them carefully, and setting aside small bundles of herbs. Each movement was deliberate, each action a preparation not just for a meal, but for the first true company she had felt in a long time. As she worked, she heard the familiar sound of hooves approaching. Her heart quickened. Tom rode up to the gate, the morning light glinting off his hat and coat. He waved, and she waved back, feeling a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Today would be different, she felt. There was an unspoken understanding between them now, a bond that had begun to form the day before. Tom dismounted and approached with his usual quiet respect. "Good morning, Mrs. Lynn," he said warmly. "I hope I'm not too early." "Not at all," she replied, her voice soft but steady. I have prepared some things." She held up the bundles of herbs and vegetables she had gathered. "We can make a meal together." Tom's eyes lit up with a gentle smile. "That sounds perfect," he said. "I also brought a few things from the ranch. Some fresh eggs, a little meat, and a few fruits. Nothing fancy, but enough to make our Christmas meal special." Mrs. Lynn's heart warmed. She had never imagined that someone would care enough to go out of their way for her. She invited him into the house, and they began preparing the meal together. This time, it was different. There was laughter, shared stories, and an easy rhythm to their work. Mrs. Lin chopped vegetables while Tom stirred the pot, and sometimes they paused to discuss which ingredients would taste best together. As they worked, Mrs. Lin told Tom more about her life. She spoke of her childhood in China, the memories of her parents, and the early days with her husband. She explained how she had come to this town, how she had struggled to survive, and the loneliness she had felt since her children moved away. She did not speak with bitterness, but with honesty, as if sharing pieces of herself that had long been kept hidden. Tom listened carefully, never interrupting, only asking gentle questions when she paused. He shared his own stories as well, about the ranch, his daily routines, and the losses he had experienced. He spoke of his late wife, how the ranch work kept him occupied, and yet how he too felt the weight of solitude. In these conversations, a quiet understanding grew between them. They realized that despite their different lives, they shared a similar experience of loss, of loneliness, and of the longing for connection. Hours passed as they worked side by side. The small house was filled with the rich aroma of cooking, the warmth of the stove, and the soft light of the lantern. Mrs. Lin found herself laughing at Tom's jokes, sharing smiles she had almost forgotten existed. She felt a lightness in her heart, as if a burden had been lifted. For the first time in years, she did not feel invisible. After the meal was prepared, they sat down to eat. The table was modestly set, but it was enough. Rice, vegetables, eggs, and a small portion of meat formed a simple feast. They ate slowly, savoring the flavors, but also savoring the company. For Mrs. Lin, this was more than just food. It was a moment of belonging, of being seen and appreciated. She realized that kindness, simple as it may be, could fill the emptiness she had carried for so long. As they ate, Tom asked about her traditions, about the way she had celebrated Christmas in her earlier years. Mrs. Lin explained that she had always focused on family, on sharing simple meals, and on expressing gratitude for what they had. She spoke of the lantern she lit each night, a symbol of hope and light. Tom listened, fascinated. He had never thought about Christmas in this way. It was not about gifts or decoration, but about connection, about love, and about presence. After the meal, they cleaned together, sharing light conversation and laughter. Tom then suggested they take a short walk outside. The sun had begun to set, casting long shadows over the frosted fields. Mrs. Lin hesitated at first, but then agreed. They walked quietly, observing the beauty of the winter landscape. The cold air made their cheeks rosy, and the silence between them was comfortable, filled with understanding rather than awkwardness. As they walked, Tom noticed a few neighbors looking curiously at Mrs. Lin's house. "I think they are beginning to see," he said softly. "They notice that you are not entirely alone today." Mrs. Lin nodded, feeling a warmth not just from the companionship of Tom, but from the realization that her life could be touched by others once more. She had been invisible for so long, but now, with a friend by her side, the world seemed less distant. Over the next few days, Tom continued to visit. Each visit brought small acts of kindness, help with chores, sharing of stories, bringing supplies, and most importantly, presents. Mrs. Lin began to anticipate his visits, preparing small things for him, arranging her home in ways she had long forgotten mattered. The relationship blossomed naturally, slowly, and gently. Neighbors began to notice the change in Mrs. Lin. Some started stopping by with small gifts, inspired by Tom's example. A few brought fresh bread, a pie, or homemade jam. The town, once distant and indifferent, started to see Mrs. Lin as part of their community. Yet, the heart of the story remained the connection between her and Tom. They did not need the acknowledgement of others to appreciate their bond. Mrs. Lin found herself sharing more of her life with Tom. She told him about the garden, about the seasons, about the simple joys that had kept her going. She spoke of dreams she had long abandoned, hopes she had kept hidden, and memories that brought both joy and sorrow. Tom shared more of his life as well, the challenges of ranch work, the quiet moments of reflection, and the small joys he found in nature and animals. Through these conversations, they learned from each other. Mrs. Lynn taught Tom the value of patience, of nurturing life slowly and carefully. Tom showed Mrs. Lynn the strength found in simplicity, in facing hardships without complaint, and in finding joy in small victories. Together, they created a shared rhythm, a sense of family that neither had experienced in years. As Christmas approached, Mrs. Lynn felt a new sense of excitement. She had a friend who cared, who respected her, and who had become part of her daily life. She realized that family did not always mean blood. Sometimes, it meant presence, kindness, and understanding. Tom had become her family in a way she had never imagined possible. On the night before Christmas, they prepared a small celebration. It was not extravagant, just a few candles, a simple meal, and the warmth of companionship, but it was filled with meaning. Mrs. Lynn felt her heart full in a way she had not felt in years. The loneliness that had weighed on her for so long had been replaced with hope and connection. As they sat by the lantern light, sharing stories and laughter, Mrs. Lynn reflected on how life could change so unexpectedly. She had expected another quiet, lonely Christmas. But instead, she had found a friend, a companion, and a family. Tom had brought more than just food or supplies. He had brought hope, warmth, and the understanding that even the smallest gestures of kindness could transform a life. That night, as she went to bed, Mrs. Lynn felt a sense of peace she had almost forgotten. The world outside was cold and quiet, but inside, her home was alive with connection. She drifted to sleep with a smile on her face, imagining the possibilities of the days to come, and the joy of sharing life with someone who truly cared. Christmas morning arrived with a golden light spilling across the town. The air was crisp, and the frost on the ground sparkled as if dusted with tiny diamonds. Mrs. Lynn woke with a flutter of excitement in her heart. She had not felt this anticipation in years. Today would not be like the other Christmases she had endured alone. Today, she had a friend, a companion, and, in a way she had never expected, a family. She dressed carefully, choosing her simplest yet neat clothes, and then she lit her small lantern. Its soft glow illuminated the room, casting gentle shadows on the walls and the photographs of her husband and children. The sight brought a mixture of nostalgia and warmth, reminding her of the love she had experienced, the family she still cherished in her memories, and the new family she had found in Tom. Tom arrived early, as he had promised. He was smiling, carrying a small bundle of supplies from his ranch. His presence was steady and reassuring, a symbol of the bond that had grown between them over the past days. "Merry Christmas, Mrs. Lynn," he said warmly, setting the bundle down. "I thought we could make a proper meal together today." Mrs. Lynn felt her eyes glisten. "Merry Christmas, Tom," she replied softly. "Thank you for coming." She led him into the kitchen, and together, they began preparing the Christmas meal. The kitchen was filled with activity and laughter. Mrs. Lynn taught Tom how to prepare a few of her traditional dishes, while he shared his knowledge of simple ranch recipes. They moved together with a rhythm that had developed over the past days, chopping vegetables, stirring pots, and arranging ingredients. Every movement was accompanied by conversation, stories, and shared smiles. For Mrs. Lynn, this simple act of cooking side by side was profoundly joyful. It was a reminder that life could be filled with small, meaningful moments, even in the absence of grandeur. As they cooked, Mrs. Lynn spoke of the Christmases she had known with her family, of the joy and warmth that filled their home despite humble means. Tom listened, fascinated by her stories and the love she carried in her memories. He shared his own experiences as well, about the ranch, the quiet life he had led, and the few Christmases he had spent alone. Through these exchanges, they discovered a deep connection, rooted in shared experiences of solitude, resilience, and hope. By midday, the meal was ready. The table was modest but beautiful. arranged with care, bowls of steaming rice, fresh vegetables, eggs, and a small portion of meat sat alongside dishes flavored with herbs and spices. Though the meal was simple, it was prepared with love and attention, and it carried a warmth that went beyond mere sustenance. They sat together, sharing the meal in companionable silence at first, savoring each bite. Mrs. Lynn noticed how different it felt to eat with someone who genuinely cared about her well-being. There was laughter, conversation, and the gentle comfort of knowing that she was no longer alone. With every story shared, with every smile exchanged, the house felt warmer, brighter, and fuller than it had in years. After the meal, they cleared the dishes together. The act was quiet and cooperative, a testament to the bond that had grown between them. Tom then suggested they take a walk outside to enjoy the Christmas day. Mrs. Lynn agreed, feeling the joy of anticipation once more. Outside, the world seemed magical. Snow glittered on rooftops. Icicles hung like crystals from the fences, and the trees were dusted with frost. The town was alive with activity, children laughing as they played in the snow, families walking together, and neighbors greeting one another warmly. Yet, for Mrs. Lynn, the most significant part of the day was the company she had found. As they walked, a few neighbors waved and smiled. Noticing the companionship between Mrs. Lynn and Tom, some brought small gifts, baked goods, fruits, or handmade items. The gestures were modest, but they carried significance. Mrs. Lynn realized that through her connection with Tom, she had become part of the community in a way she had not experienced in years. She felt seen, appreciated, and included. Tom noticed the small gestures from the neighbors and smiled. "It seems you are becoming quite popular," he said gently. Mrs. Lynn laughed softly. "It is unexpected," she admitted, "but it is nice." Their walk continued, and they returned home to the warmth of the small house. Mrs. Lynn felt a deep sense of gratitude. She had faced so many Christmases in silence and solitude, but now she was surrounded by kindness, laughter, and companionship. She realized that family was not only defined by blood, but by the presence of those who cared, who offered love and support, and who shared in life's joys and hardships. As the afternoon faded into evening, Tom suggested they light a few candles and place them around the house. Mrs. Lynn agreed, and together they arranged them carefully. The soft glow of the candles, combined with the warm light of the lantern, filled the home with a sense of peace, joy, and celebration. For the first time in many years, Mrs. Lynn felt that Christmas had truly arrived. They sat by the table, sipping tea and sharing memories. Mrs. Lynn spoke of her husband, of the love they had shared, and of the lessons she had learned about resilience and hope. Tom shared his own reflections about the quiet joys he had found in life, the importance of kindness, and the value of human connection. Their conversation flowed easily, filled with laughter, empathy, and understanding. As night fell, the house was filled with a quiet contentment. The simple acts of cooking, eating, walking, and sharing stories had transformed a once lonely and empty home into a place of warmth, joy, and family. Mrs. Lynn felt a profound sense of peace, realizing that the presence of another person could bring more joy than any material possession ever could. Over the next few days, their bond continued to grow. Tom helped with chores around the house and garden, and Mrs. Lynn shared more of her life, her traditions, and her wisdom. Together, they laughed, worked, and reflected on their lives, forming a family not bound by blood, but by care, respect, and mutual support. Neighbors began to notice the change in Mrs. Lynn's demeanor. She was no longer withdrawn or silent. She smiled often, greeted others warmly, and even invited a few to share small meals with her. Inspired by her example and by Tom's kindness, the community slowly embraced her, and she found herself surrounded by people who valued her presence. One evening, as they sat by the lantern light, Mrs. Lynn reflected on the journey of the past days. She had faced so many years of solitude, yet a single act of kindness had changed everything. Tom had entered her life quietly, without expectation, and had brought hope, warmth, and companionship. She realized that even in the darkest moments, life could surprise you with unexpected joy and connection. Tom, sensing her reflection, said softly, "Family is not always about who you are related to. Sometimes, it's about who shows up when you need them the most." Mrs. Lynn smiled, tears brimming in her eyes. She nodded in agreement. "You are right, Tom. You have become my family in a way I never imagined. Thank you." "Thank you." Tom reached across the table and gently held her hand. "And you have become my family too," he said. "I am grateful for your presence, your wisdom, and your kindness." From that moment on, their lives intertwined in a quiet, beautiful rhythm. They shared meals, worked together in the garden, and spent evenings talking and reflecting. The small house, once filled with silence and loneliness, became a place of laughter, love, and warmth. The story of Mrs. Lynn and Tom spread quietly through the town, inspiring others to look for ways to offer kindness and companionship to those who might be alone. People began reaching out to neighbors, offering help, and sharing small gestures of love. In this way, the friendship between a Chinese widow and a lone rancher became a quiet catalyst for community connection, spreading hope beyond the walls of their small home. Years later, Mrs. Lynn would remember that Christmas as the turning point of her life. It was the day she learned that hope could arrive in the most unexpected forms, that loneliness could be softened by the presence of a caring heart, and that family could be created, not only through blood, but through shared love, kindness, and connection. Tom continued to visit every day, and over time, they became inseparable companions. Together, they celebrated many more Christmases, each one filled with warmth, laughter, and the knowledge that they had found something precious. A family built from understanding, care, and the simple but profound act of showing up for someone in need. In the end, the small house at the edge of the town was no longer a place of loneliness. It was a home filled with hope, with shared memories, and with the quiet joy of two people who had found each other in life's unexpected ways. And every Christmas, the lantern in the window glowed brightly, a symbol of light, warmth, and the enduring power of kindness. Mrs. Lynn often thought back to the Christmas she had feared would be empty, and she smiled. That day had taught her that even when life seems bleak, hope can arrive in the most unexpected forms. Sometimes, it rides quietly into your life on the back of a kind, gentle soul, bringing warmth, connection, and the feeling of being truly home. And in that truth, Mrs. Lynn and Tom found not only friendship but family, a family born from love, respect, and the courage to care for one another.